now let's get a little more serious. And let's talk about some threats. So we're going to talk about security. In the security space, there's always a battle between the offense and the defense. New technologies get released. Let's just get straight to it. AI is here. It is widely available. It's always been here. It's always been part of the cybersecurity infrastructure, but it's changed a little bit in the last couple of years. Have these new AI developments are they a net positive or a net negative?
Yeah, so first of all, I think to your point, AI and cybersecurity have been together for a long time. First in concept for decades, actually, and then in many ways in the real world, a lot of consumer products today, for example, have been using AI to detect threats now for about 20 plus years. I actually wrote one of the first ones, which is why I know about this. Your banks have been using AI to make sure that you are the right person when you log in. They assume that somebody's stolen your password already, and they're usually right about that. But it turns out nobody can steal the way you act. And so they look exactly at every single behavior and make a determination. Anti-spam technology, which has been protecting your email inboxes, we talk about email productivity. Spam reduction is a big component of that, and that's also fueled using AI. So I think there's been this beautiful coevolution between AI and cybersecurity for many years. Where I see things going are the following. So number one, I think for cybersecurity in particular, a really key attribute with respect to AI is explainability. We look at a lot of these AI models, and they have trillions of parameters. No one even knows how they work at all. But even if I showed you all trillion parameters, what human being can sit there and figure out what this model is actually doing? In cybersecurity, we cannot afford to have that opaqueness, because whenever you have opaqueness of any sort, that's where the weaknesses in systems can come in and not be detected. If a threat actor came in and modified my algorithm in some way and I couldn't detect that, that could be a real problem. So I think explainability is going to be one of the key areas we'll see in the future with respect to AI and cybersecurity. And then in general, we are seeing the tools like LLMs being used inside Security Operations Center. So if you're sitting there, you're an analyst, you've got tons of data coming into you. If you can have some engine that can process that data and give you the insights and tell you where to look, that Copilot use case I think is the most promising one, similar to what we just talked about with Microsoft and their Copilot use cases. Then threat actors themselves are going to be using these techniques, but from my perspective, they've been using these techniques for a long time. It's not like the availability of LLMs has fundamentally changed a lot, except for I think with social engineering attacks where you get emails and things like that that are now going to have no grammatical errors. But I will tell you, I'm not sure threat actors welcome that. And here's the thing with threat actors. The worst thing you can do with a threat actor is engage with them up until they ask you for your money and then hang up the phone, because they've not wasted all their time trying to convince you. So they tend to look for people who are kind of gullible up front. And anybody who clicks on an email that's full of grammatical errors and spelling mistakes is probably likely to also fall victim to the crime, versus somebody who, who wouldn't click on that email normally may be the kind of person the threat actors don't end up converting over. Yeah. So they care about their conversion rates just like most consumers companies do. So that's kind of the full-fledged answer.
The typos are actually helping them find the appropriate victim.
In certain ways, yes. So that's why I'm really curious to see how this plays out, because we haven't seen a measurable change in grammar in some of these scam emails. They still tend to be pretty poorly written. So we're measuring this, by the way, and I'm going to see how this plays out, but we're keeping an eye on it.
So they may be making typos but intentionally.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? If you want to convince somebody to, the last thing you want is that somebody tells you at the very end, sorry, I'm not going to give you those gift cards that I, thought you needed.
Cool. Robert, let's talk about the infrastructure and how you're using AI to sort of protect the infrastructure of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. So over at CISA, we're a relatively new federal agency. We just hit 6 years old on Sunday. But I think to your point, a lot of these technologies have been in use for a long period of time in different formats. So my prior role was more in law enforcement, and it was catching bad guys, catching people trying to bring illicit material into the United States, whether it was radiological or pharmaceuticals, and we were doing predictive AI work in the customs world for probably about 20 years. Our ability to target cargo and understand that container probably contains something we don't want to see. That container is probably fine. What we're doing over at CISA, we're taking really advantage of what's available in commercial tools right now. A lot of the technologies running on our endpoints, running in our security operations center, have AI built into them. I think you make an excellent point as well. It can help us amplify our existing human resources. I think I'm like everyone in this room. It is really hard to recruit, retain, qualified staff, and that can be really hard. And I've taken a different approach, maybe. Public service is hard. I can't always pay people as much, but what I can always give them is this great and intense sense of mission. That every day you go home making a difference. And maybe we only keep people for 2 or 3 years now, but they go out into industry with a different format. What AI allows us to do, we're having a lot of our analysts have to learn a lot less of different query languages for each different tool. You can kind of write in plain English and get information back. We're actually in the middle right now of implementing an AI tool for our authority to operate process that we think will take us down. I got it down to about 30 days in my first 3 years. We're hoping to get down to about 7 days before we can authorize a new system to go live. And that's really big. The other thing we've done at CISA under Director Easterly's leadership is we have an AI action plan. We have a way that we work across the line, and one of the portions of it is the safe and responsible use of AI for our mission, and that's co-led by myself as the CIO, our Chief Privacy Officer, and our Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer. And we kind of review every use case. We make sure that it's following the guidelines set forth within the government, and that we can make informed decisions to push forward the mission.
Charlie, we talked a little bit about how you told me, as always, sometimes a good offense is the best defense. Can you explain a little bit about how that works and how the threats landscape has evolved over the last 10 years or so?
Yeah, absolutely. So another warfighting domain is cyber. It's just like the air, land, space, and the sea and the undersea. I know we have some ex-submariners here in the audience, so I had to mention that. Where in all of those domains, going on offense is the best defense. And I firmly believe that's the same case inside the cyber environment. So we can use these AI tools, and the Department of Defense is using these AI tools to automate a lot of our functions for offensive cyber so that we can execute with a speed and agility and at a scale we simply couldn't do without those tools. For instance, being able to scan and look at adversaries' networks, find vulnerabilities, use that automation to then design tools and or weapons that we want to use very rapidly, take those tools into a separate enclave, test them very quickly, figure out what the results will be, what does it mean in terms of attribution or detection, refine them, employ them, and then hopefully achieve the effects that we want to accomplish.
Yeah, so it sounds like all of you are relatively optimistic about these tools being a net positive in the right hands. At the same time, we were talking in one of our prep calls, Ellie, and you said for the first time digital theft has outpaced physical theft. Is that nationwide or globally?
That's globally for sure.
Globally.
And just in the US alone, it's about a 10x difference, which is crazy to think about because you don't think about cyber theft.
And this
in
has
the same
happened,
way.
this wasn't the case 10 years ago.
Correct. Yeah, I think we saw a few inflection points. I think the pandemic definitely was an inflection point because people were spending much more time online. And as you can imagine, that's what criminals think about. If you ask Willie Sutton, why did he rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. That was simple, right? And criminals today are going to go rob digital banks and digital vaults. And unfortunately, we spend all this time and energy, we protect our physical homes. And yet cyber is a 10x bigger threat, and we spend so little trying to protect our digital homes.
So what does this epidemic look like? Is it identity theft? Is it ransomware? Is it compromised crypto wallets? Like how do the numbers get that big?
I think it's because it's all the above. In many ways, what's happening is every day new technologies are being introduced into the fold. We're seeing terms like ChatGPT didn't exist a few years ago. Crypto wallets, that's in our lifetime. These kind of things are proliferating, and as a result, the attack surface for a typical threat actor is fairly vast. It's almost like slim pickings. It's like they're in a kid in a candy store, basically trying to figure out where they want to exploit the average consumer. And one of the things that this has been our mission at Aura for a long time, with the recognition that for the average consumer, navigating this landscape is really tricky. You know, I had a neighbor, and I'm going to call him Bob for the purpose of this exercise.
Kind of cruel considering his name's Bob.
Oh, it's not, I know. I mean, a different, maybe I've been using the name Bob. So no, not to you, Bob. But he's an elderly gentleman. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, the doorbell rang, and I went out, and it was very strange because he didn't normally pop in, let alone like when everything was shut down. And he was kind of pacing outside, so I opened the door. I thought maybe our fence was broken or something. And he's like, hey, I know you're in cybersecurity, Zuli. I think I've been hacked. And so he shows me his iPad, and in his iPad there's an email saying, dear Bob, we know you've been doing some things online that you're not very proud of, and unless you send us this amount of money in Bitcoin, we are going to tell your family about your online activity. I was like, no, Bob, this is a scam. They just send these emails to a lot of people. They hope somebody's going to think that this is real and respond back to it. At which point things got a bit awkward because he started going to a bit of a confessional with me on his online. Now, I did not want to hear this because he's an elderly gentleman. He's a grandfather. I was like, please, so,
TMI.
TMI. Okay, but so it's fake, Bob. Don't worry about it. He's like, well, how do I stop this from happening again? I was like, well, let's see. You need a VPN. You need a password manager. You need antivirus technology. You need something to get your data off the dark web. You need something that will actually take your data off of all these data broker sites, which is probably how they found you in the first place. And I started thinking about what he needed, and it was like 16 different technologies. And the average consumer cannot navigate that. It's too much to expect. It's just completely unreasonable. We have not built up the street smarts in the digital world that we have in the physical world. We had millennia to hone those street smarts. We have had a few decades to build up digital street smarts. And so for me, the ultimate goal here is how do we just put that all together and make it simple for the consumer? And that's really kind of what we're all about.
So the consumer, there are turnkey packages, but you're going to have to buy everything. I mean, cobbling it together doesn't make sense because you're going to have to buy the whole package.
Yeah, and so our view is that you can put it all together in a meaningful way and help the average consumer navigate that without making it complicated. I mean, historically, security has been a complicated field designed for like big organizations and governments. As you push consumer security now in the current realm, we have to simplify security so it's accessible to the average consumer. And we simplify it, in fact, by using AI and intelligence behind the scenes so that things run seamlessly, but we're just predicting everything as things happen.
So Robert, in terms of like critical infrastructure, it's amazing to me how many stories have come out that the power grid has been hacked, that the federal government has lost a huge database of personnel information. There's all these seem like critical systems, seem like massive vulnerabilities. How would you rate the United States' infrastructure in terms of resilience compared to other nations?
Well, I think I'll touch on a couple things. I'll certainly agree with a lot of what you said, but I think also too one of the things that we have to change is kind of change culturally how we think about security. There's a lot of things the individual can do. There's a lot actually on CISA's website dealing with individuals, not just companies, on things that we suggest people do. Turn on multi-factor authentication. Secure your accounts. If you don't know how to do it, calling your bank or elsewhere, they will talk you through how to get your accounts into a better place. We publish kind of like a hack lore thing on several social medias where we don't want people afraid of open Wi-Fi. That's not really a threat vector that we typically see. I think on critical infrastructure, I've actually been now with the Department of Homeland Security for about 17 years, and before that I worked in DoD or in uniform actually. And one of the things I didn't know before I came to CISA 3 years ago was up to, we don't have the exact percentage between us and FEMA, who kind of co-leads some of these efforts with us with the Transportation Security Administration that has pipeline security. Up to about 80% of the critical infrastructure in the United States is privately owned or owned by small municipalities. There is no national electrical company in the United States, no national water treatment company or other things. So when you often look at the resources that they have, say you're a small municipality in a part of the country, you don't have these resources. Your IT person might be part-time at best. They're doing other jobs. They're doing it as a volunteer basis. And we know certain nation states want to harm us. We know they want to get in. They want to compromise industrial control systems to have this level of access. So I think one of the areas that we concentrate really heavily on is our partnership mission at CISA. We're actually one of the few agencies that can provide free services to critical infrastructure, private or public. Some large companies don't need our services, but over 11,000 state, local, territorial, and tribal governments and municipalities, water treatment plants, power utilities take advantage of our services. Some of those are just what we call cyber hygiene scanning. We go out once a week, scan your external environment, provide you a report on what you need to change. We have a field force, 10 regions across the country, a state cyber advisor in every state capital, as long as with cybersecurity advisors and in every state that can help people or these small companies through that. So I think the threat vector, to your point, is absolutely there. It's how do we make the price higher for the adversary to compromise these. I think that's very important. Increase education. And then another initiative we have is our Secure by Design initiative, with over 200 companies have signed on to do Secure by Design work and have signed the CISA pledge. And I think that that's a really great achievement.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because the fact that it's so distributed and there's so many different smaller operations, it makes it a nightmare to manage. But it also provides some resilience because maybe you take down one power plant, but you're not going to be able to take out the whole network. That would become more difficult. So there's like a pro and con built into it.
Absolutely.
So Charlie, coming from the military, we talked a little bit about the lessons that you could learn from cyber warfare that could be applied to overall the whole overall cyber environment. Can you just talk a little bit about what some of those lessons are that we could apply in the civilian world?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's the same environment. I mean, the vast majority of this environment, about 80%, resides in the private sector. So it's not surprising that a lot of the lessons that we may learn would be applicable to enterprises, businesses, or to private individuals. We could talk a lot about the technical aspects of it, but the two thoughts that I would leave you with would be first, that we're seeing an incredible advancement in the sophistication and the capabilities of the malicious cyber actors and cyber criminals. And yes, a lot of that is being brought on by the development of AI type of tools. We can no longer look at our networks and depend on indications of compromise or known bad IP addresses to determine when something is going on. We have to be able to look at very subtle changes in behavior of these sophisticated actors to determine that we may actually have been compromised, and then be prepared to take the actions necessary to contain them and remove them from the network. The second big lesson that was actually just touched upon, I think, is unfortunately this is a domain of not a matter of if, but when you face some type of an event. Hopefully, for those of you that are business owners, it won't be a significant one, but the odds are you will face something at some point in time. So the investment in a resilient infrastructure for your business or for your home is extremely important, so that you can minimize the downtime or the exposures that you have. You can get back to your business. The companies that I see that do this the best measure themselves with metrics that are time-based. So when they hire another company to come and perform a red teaming action or aggressor action or a pen testing action on their networks, they measure themselves with things like mean time to detect, mean time to contain, mean time to remove from the network, mean time to patch. And I think that's the approach that folks ought to consider. That's
a great point. Guys, great conversation. I hope you stick around for the rest of the day. I suspect people have a lot of questions for you, but we'll get to those in the break. Right now, let's just give them a big round of applause.
Thanks, Dan.